Hello and welcome to the WARC Podcast. I'm Anne Marie Kerwin, America's editor. Today, we're going to tackle one of the CMO's biggest hurdles, C-suite alignment. With only 40% of marketers feeling like the C-suite truly understands advertising's role, securing brand budget is harder than ever. And this is a blocker to success that we explore in our new report, the Multiplier Playbook. This is the second in a series of podcasts we're doing this year, talking with our partners about that new report. And these are the same partners who joined us for last year's blockbuster report, The Multiplier Effect. Today, we sit down with Mike Menkes and Jason McNellis from Analytic Partners to unpack how marketers can stop speaking in marketing metrics and start talking like a P&L owner. But first, a word from our sponsor.
There's no shortage of opinions in marketing right now, but the brands winning in today's market aren't adding to the noise, they're helping marketers navigate through it. Lions Advisory partners with the world's leading brands, agencies, and media platforms to transform their point of view into game-changing thought leadership. That means evidence-based research, frameworks, and expert commentary, all built on decades of expertise from WARC, Cannes Lions, Effie, and Contagious. In today's market, it's not enough to just have an opinion. You need to be a credible authority. Take the next step at lions.co/thought leadership.
Welcome back. If you're a CMO or a senior marketing leader, you know that securing investment for long-term brand building is an uphill battle. It's also a reason that companies are failing to achieve the outsized results you can see when you coordinate brand building and performance marketing. Joining me today to help us get past this blocker are Mike Menkes and Jason McNellis of Analytic Partners. Mike and Jason, welcome to the show.
Hi, Anne Marie. Thanks for having us.
Hi, Mike.
Great to be here.
Hi, Jason. I'm so glad you could join me. So let's get into it. Core argument from last year's multiplier effect and this year's multiplier playbook is that many CMOs and organizations have focused too heavily on narrow performance-leaning metrics and are missing out on the benefits of sustained brand building. So what are some of the risks of when performance metrics become the core of a conversation that a CMO has with a CFO?
Yeah, I can jump in and take that one first, Jason. I don't think it's really the CMO's fault per se. It's really more a problem of how partial digital data is kind of being represented in different organizations. And the risk is really showing these metrics because they are misleading, and they're okay to use in certain situations and moments, but often they understate the impact of different marketing impacts. And so that is really kind of the crux of the issue here. And then showing them regularly creates a situation where people begin to rely on them and they become to be believed as truth. And then when there is new, better information that becomes available, there's a lack of trust that kind of rises within the C-suite. And so that's kind of the thing. That's really what we're trying to get after here with making sure that we're asking the right kinds of questions and make sure we're using the right kind of measurement capabilities for the right kinds of decisions.
Yeah, I think if we look at some of these performance metrics like cost per click or cost per action, what they really struggle with is they treat all actions, all clicks the same. And all clicks are not the same. And if you start making, especially budget decisions, especially cross-channel decisions, with just treating all clicks the same, you are going to limit your growth, right? You will ignore the multiplier effect. You are choosing to go down a path of making your marketing more expensive for the exact same outcome.
That's true. Yeah. So, Mike, you alluded a bit to this, but why is there often such a disconnect between the CMO and CFO? Are they just speaking different languages or?
I think there's plenty of organizations where the CMO and the CFO are on the same page and aligned, and I don't even think it's a disconnect between those two individuals, or it's really more about the fact that there's disconnects at all, and that can happen within the marketing department, it can happen within the finance department as well. But I know that having confidence in measurement and having confidence in forecasting or predicting what's going to happen is really important, and that is why this is such an important topic. And I think really there'd be ideally one version of the truth that the CMO and the CFO can refer to, or at least one version of truth specific to the questions at hand around how much to invest and what the expected impact is going to be. And so that's really, I think, where the opportunity lies in making sure that organizations and leaders know which source and method should be used for different types of business decisions.
Yeah, I think the fact is both roles are specialized, right? If you go to a giant finance conference, there are all kinds of sessions that bore the heck out of me, like about invoicing and reconciliation. And it doesn't mean it's not important, but it's not what I think about as somebody who's trying to use data and analytics to drive growth. And similarly, I imagine if people from a finance team went to a large marketing conference, there'd be all kinds of details that they don't think about. So I like to think about it as, what's that minimal viable cooperation that we need to 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 drive growth, right? And it's not going to be the entire finance team and it's not going to be the entire marketing team, but there does need to be some agreement there. And as Mike alluded to, if we can have a single source of truth, if we can have shared metrics, that's going to facilitate that conversation and make sure that there isn't that friction. Because I think, at the highest levels, the data clearly shows that vast majority of CFOs want to drive growth, vast majority of CMOs want to drive growth. So if we can agree on that, we ought to be able to work through the details to make that happen.
Right, exactly. Everyone wants the same goals. It's just, it seems like we're not clear on how we get there together, I guess is the problem. So, one of the things we talk about is for CMOs to stop speaking in marketing metrics and start talking like P&L owners. So, let's talk a little bit about like what metrics should be on that shared source of truth. What should we be looking at?
Yeah, I think there's probably metrics that should and shouldn't be used. So it's probably, conceptually if we're talking about the CMO and the CFO, and we're talking about what is the expected impact of my marketing budget, we need to make sure that we're using a source that is getting to the crux of incrementality. What is the incremental impact from our marketing activity that we would lose in the absence of that marketing activity? Now, the word incremental is actually used in a lot of different places. And part of the issue in the industry is that there's a lot of terminology and calculations that sound the same, and they're not. They're very, very, very different. And that's what I think there's a big opportunity in many of these organizations is to seek to be curious about where data is coming from, where the different metrics are coming from. I think the source and the method is really important for organizations to understand. So fundamentally, we want to make sure it's an incremental measurement. We want to make sure that incremental measurement is coming from a place, an independent place, whether that's internal or external, but a truly independent place that isn't being sourced from somebody that will benefit from spending more or less on marketing. And of course, a holistic take on understanding to get at an accurate reflection of incrementality. So when I talk about holistic, really kind of talking about the word commercial, that matters. Commercial matters. Being holistic, you need to understand all the business drivers that are affecting business so you don't understate the role of marketing. And that's true of even A/B testing. And we need to make sure, especially if the question, depends on the question, but we need to make sure we're factoring in direct and indirect effects. Somebody searched for something, what caused the search, right? We need to make sure that that element is brought in. Halo and cannibalization, all those things need to be factored in. So those are the things we want to be looking for, and then can talk a little bit about what are the kind of some of the metrics that are misleading that we want to avoid using.
Yeah, and then one of the places I like to start with what metrics is, what is the CFO and the CEO talking about on the investor calls? Mike talked a lot about incremental, but is it incremental customer counts? Is it incremental units? Is it incremental margin? Making sure that we're using the same nouns and thinking about it the same way, right? Is it overall for the whole country, or is it, same stores versus new stores, new products versus existing products? Like there's those details too. Incremental is absolutely essential, but to the metrics point, also matching up with the call. And there are times, we have a client where, by golly, the CEO does talk about brand awareness and brand consideration on the investors call. So yeah, it's fine for that CMO to have plans, doing those metrics, but that is an exception, right? That's relatively rare to see, you know, a large, Fortune 1000 company sharing their brand metrics and their brand metrics versus their competitors on a quarterly business results call. But if that's the case, then you can certainly match to that language. But normally It's much more about incremental units, incremental sales, incremental customers, incremental accounts, um, and then, matching the language that way.
Yeah, that's great. And I know, Mike, you were talking about like what some of the misleading metrics are that we maybe want to avoid. In the multiplier effect and the multiplier playbook, we talk about a negative spiral that we call the doom loop, which is the result of looking at misleading metrics. Can you explain how that loop works and what the cost is of getting into a doom loop?
Sure, yeah. I mean, just to first, before I jump into that too, just in terms of like some of the misleading metrics, I think this is not a comprehensive list, but there's a lot of metrics that sound the same. So like ROAS is not the same as ROI. That's a good example. And even how things are, the terminology used within or different organizations gets adapted. So sometimes words get turned into other words that isn't really what it originally was. So, but things that are coming from a siloed place. So within a walled garden, within Google, within Amazon, within Meta, with, you name it. These are situations where, for the most part, a lot of the data is coming from that one place. Last click is something that really, sadly, is still being used more than it should be today, which is a good kind of way to describe that doom loop. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Click-through rates is another one. We know click-through rates are misleading. They aren't a representation of business impact or incremental impacts, and they're used as they are. But click-through rates, especially today, in today's world, there's more zero-click behavior than there was before, where people are searching for things and not clicking through. Doesn't mean they're not getting the information from that situation. So those click-through rates are really, and a lot of times we're looking at minor differences in click-through rates and extrapolating that to bigger insights. So journey data, anything that you're talking about using an individual or household is going to be missing a lot of information. So those are all the sources that we need to be mindful of. Doesn't mean we can't and shouldn't be using that data for certain purposes, but if the purpose is to engage with the marketing and finance teams together to come together and understand business impacts, we should not be using those things. But your question was around, the doom loop. So if you have a situation, just put simply, where somebody searches for a product and then purchases it, um, generally speaking, if we're using ROAS, last click, those misleading metrics, the credit will be given to the search. But a lot of times, in fact, we have from ROI Genome Research Analytic partners, we know that 30% of paid search clicks are driven by other forms of marketing. So we're over crediting search, and those same sources often say video advertising does nothing, which is not true. So a lot of times the video advertising, and it could be any sort of other advertising, could be word of mouth, could be completely unrelated to marketing whatsoever, but search is getting credit for things that it shouldn't. And I'm just using that as one example, but this dynamic is present in traditional search as well as retail media. We need to be careful about as well. But what happens is the investment is made based upon the insights that SearchWorks video doesn't, and then that just continues to be a loop that spirals and continues to go down the wrong path of lower funnel. So
Yeah, I think the key part with a doom loop is that shifting spend, right? And that we're shifting spend towards clickable media, away from less clickable media, even though the performance difference is much less than that clickability difference. And then that becomes self-fulfilling. And so that brand support that you're taking the money away from is going towards those clicks, but now that makes those clicks more expensive. We gotta put more impressions or higher quality impressions in front of a larger audience because they haven't been primed by that brand media. And that's where that loop component comes in, right? It just gets worse and worse every month or every quarter that you're optimizing this way.
There are some positives. I mean, before we're not anti-performance marketing. It's just you need to do both brand building and performance. So, what can performance metrics actually help a CMO do better?
yeah, I mean, first and foremost, certainly performance marketing is important. I don't think we would want anybody to take the wrong thing away from this. This is really just about making sure we understand the right balance of brand versus performance marketing, and performance metrics tend to overstate performance marketing. This is a generalized concept, but performance metrics are, generally speaking, we need to be careful about them. And I would encourage organizations to ask where the source is and what the method is to be able to get to some of these things and really truly seek that out. If you're talking about within an environment and two of the exact same types of executions, but there's one subtle difference and they're both clickable activities and you can get to comparisons potentially within that realm. But even click-through rates now we know are increasingly less and less reliable because of that zero-click behavior. So a lot of times it's just used because it's there, and we would caution against that. Sometimes, bad data is worse than no data at all a lot of times. So we just need to remember that as well.
Yeah, I think performance marketing is essential, right? Like that's that other, you know, depending on the brand, 40 to 70% of their spend, right? Like that's key. But what we also see in the data time after time again, especially in aggregate, is that people overspend on performance. And so, yeah, this is definitely an example of the synergy, synergy of the and, right? That's why we called it the multiplier effect. It's not about brand versus performance. It's about brand and performance and how they can work together. But it's much more common to see a brand overspend on performance than it is to see a brand overspend on brand. And that's sometimes where maybe we sound like we're harping on it. We're like, we're trying to, inform the marketplace and just stress like we see this challenge over and over again, and it's leaving money on the table. It's one of the reasons why marketing budgets have been so slow to rebound. If you use like Gartner CMO survey, which they just, released 2026 about 2 weeks ago, right? Like, oh yay, marketing budgets are back up 0.1% from their all-time low of the last 2 years. Where that's not enough. I mean, marketing budgets were almost 40% higher just in 2019. All right, we've given up so much. And so it's very important for us to be more efficient with what we have so we can earn back those budgets over time. And to do that, for the average brand, it's more likely that their opportunity is to shift some investment more towards upper funnel than it is shifting more investment towards the lower funnel.
Good news! Decades of benchmarking, insights, and best-in-class case studies are now available at the push of a button. Lions Intelligence is the new operating system for creative marketing excellence with state-of-the-art AI technology and established marketing insights from the WARC, Contagious IQ, and WARC, all in a single adaptive workspace that evolves with your thinking. Save hours of manual work and share your thinking with clarity and confidence. Lions Intelligence is where groundwork becomes great work. Insight, strategy, creativity, execution, all in one place. To learn more, check out intelligence.lions.co.
I just want to go back to something you said, Mike, about definitions and how people sometimes are using different definitions for the same terms. Let's talk about ROI. So it seems that often you'd have two CMOs who maybe aren't using the same definition of ROI, and a CMO may have a different definition than a CFO about what ROI means. So, how should we be defining ROI as a marketer and as a finance person so that we can get alignment around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is communication and focusing on what business decisions we are seeking to make. It would be nice to say, well, let's name all of the different metrics and make sure we have the right terminology around them. I think within organizations they need to do that, but it's an industry challenge, and so the most important thing is that the finance team and the marketing team are engaging to converse and talk about what are the goals that they have, what is the information they have to make those decisions, what is the source of that information, how reliable is it, and have that sort of conversation. I think there's a fear of, in some cases, and there's plenty of organizations that are operating really well, but there's some hesitation to open up this dialogue because of concerns that maybe the number's not a certain number, or whatever it may be. But it's important to really, if you're truly believe in marketing, and we know it works. I mean, it certainly does, but we want to make sure there's a conversation that happens so that we can have that shared buy-in and confidence around the measurement and around the business decisions we need to make. So really think the key is just open up dialogue.
Yeah, I think it's super important. if you don't have that shared definition, how are you going to agree to what your budget can do, right? How are you going to negotiate the effects of a budget cut? There's no agreement on what a dollar of marketing does, right? What a dollar of media does. So my general advice to brands is, start with ROMI, return on marketing investment that has marketing in the name. So it's presumably something, you know, you can own as a CMO. But to Mike's point, absolutely work with finance about it and also have a roadmap on it, right? You might start out simple where it's, the incremental returns from your media divided by those media costs, what we might call working costs. But over time, you probably want a roadmap to start including in the non-working media costs, things like agency fees and production costs and stuff like that. But that's harder. um, but you can relatively easy start with this idea of incremental returns divided by working media. But I would stress over time, like the more you load into that definition, the more business decisions you can start making with it. Like how many creative refreshes do I need per year? As an example. But those conversations should also be occurring with finance because what often happens, at least with the big brands that I've worked in, you know, marketing is almost never going to have like costs of goods sold in their return on marketing investment. And so some of the CFOs that we've interviewed for our research, they just always divide those ROMI numbers in their heads. You want to agree with your CFO what that division should be. And so that both sides of the table are thinking about cost of goods sold the same way, and that how marketing is contributing to the bottom line, so actual net margin, how that everybody's on the same page there, and your CFO is not sort of giving you an excessive discount based on kind of a rule of thumb and really expecting more from marketing than what is reasonable.
And I would just add to that too, the long-term impact. Not to complicate the points that Jason made, but I think it's relevant when we're talking to finance in particular, because a lot of marketing measurement is very focused on the short term, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we understand that there is a lasting effect of marketing as well. If you're seeing the ad when you're not in the market and later you are, any advertiser is going to help influence the purchase decision inevitably, and as well as the types of products that are or services where there's a new customer or purchase and then there's repeat behaviors. So there's a lot that we need to unpack there. So that's more important when we're thinking about should we spend and how much should we spend and what's our long-term planning as opposed to like what should I be doing this year to hit my goal. But it's relevant when we're talking about the role that marketing plays in growing business.
Exactly. Yeah. See, that marketing is seen as an investment in growing the business as much as driving sales today. Yeah.
And that can be measured too. I think that's important to note. All the things that we're talking about can be measured and measured well with a high degree of confidence, with a lot of granularity. I think there is a lot of myths in the industry around what can and cannot be done with the data and the analytics. Analytics can accurately measure types of channels, executions, campaigns, short-term, long-term, dollar sales versus new customer, accounts and things like that, brand health. So there's a lot that can be done in this space, and it's important to make sure that that's also being discussed within those organizations.
And I think as we talk about influencing finance, it's not just measuring historically what's happened with a high degree of granularity, but also forecasting what is going to happen for different scenarios, for different levels of investment with a high degree of granularity. That's one of the ways that you build, build trust is it's like, yeah, we want to know what happened, but really what's important is our forward-looking decisions. So based on the media budget levels that we're discussing, what is that expected impact in total? But also from a finance perspective, when can I expect to see it? Especially when I'm talking about brand investments and, there might be a 6-month or an 18-month payoff window. Okay, but can you forecast week by week what this $1 million flight in TV is going to produce? And to Mike's point, yeah, you can do that now, right? That's been available for several years. That's not magic. That is that is part of a modern marketing measurement stack.
I was recently at the A&A Brand Masters, and from a lot of the marketers there, I heard them saying that they've been making the arguments, they've been bringing the data, but they're still facing a very skeptical C-suite. So how can marketers improve their data game, show the granularity, and what's the persuasive argument they can make to a skeptical C-suite?
There was a PhD thesis on this last year, right? This exact idea, this defending of marketing budgets to, CFOs, CEOs, and, business unit presidents. And what that research showed was, there's a lot of different mechanisms that a CMO could use, but the two that are the most effective and don't degrade over time, so kind of like the most durable, you can use them over and over and over again, was opportunity elaboration, right? If if I'm a CEO, what am I looking for my CMO? Like identify for me new opportunities at a customer level, right? You're supposed to understand, your team is supposed to understand the market, the competition, the customer behaviors better than anybody else in the business. So what are the new opportunities that you're identifying? So that opportunity elaboration, but especially new opportunities tends to be what senior leaders are looking for. And then the other one that comes up, which we've already mentioned a couple times, but it's so important, is that idea of granularity. So it's not just, if we invest more in brand, we'll see a bigger benefit, but actually being able to forecast that out. And then if the CFO has a question like, okay, but I'd really like to push that investment back to the beginning of next quarter, being able to forecast, get back to them the same day. All right, if we do that, this is how the payoff cycle for that investment will look if we push it back to 3 weeks so it hits us next quarter so we can, do something with this quarter's results. Like that granularity and then also that speed, like that helps, right? Like that makes it look like what you are doing is real, that you can control it, right? That you can modify it based on real world conditions because we all know that we're living in a volatile and uncertain world. And so that ability to kind of show at various levels of detail, it's generally by sub-channel, by geography, by week, what would happen if we make these changes, that that level of detail starts to build up confidence. Now, I would stress you don't start with that level of detail, but you have it in your back pocket when questions arise, right? I would still advise people to tell a simple story, but carry a large appendix.
Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on, which I think is important, is there's probably a lot of conversations around what's the right metric and you know methodology differences, yada yada, right? But in the end, I think it's really important, first and foremost, that leaders align on goals. What is the goal? What is our goal? Is our goal to hit a certain sales number, certain number of new customer acquisition? In what time period are we talking about? That is really the crux of what should be aligned on. And then everything else falls into place once we're able to do that. Now, obviously, the goals might not be crystal clear in all cases and situations, and there's disruption. But if we can anchor the conversation on what is it that we're seeking to do, then you have a starting point to talk about how are we going to get there instead of like philosophical conversations around what might happen in the future, and when. But it grounds it in reality to a point where you can have the conversations Jason was talking about to be able to have the back and forth on, yeah, no problem. Let's push that back. Here's going to be the implications of that change, and being able to knowledgeably and accurately reflect that and showcase that. And I would add, if there is some skepticism, what happens through this process is you're building trust and reducing skepticism by having this conversation and then continuing to have the conversation. It's not a one-time thing, right? So when it happens and then they see that the analytics actually is, wow, that is predictive, you gain the confidence and the trust that allows you to make better decisions as we go forward.
That's right. That sounds so good to understand that that's what we should be doing. But a lot of times that kind of goes out the window when things aren't going so well, right? We were told 62% of marketers, we had a survey that said their budgets have been flat or declining. Can we talk about like using scenario planning to defend a budget and showing the C suite what happens when they cut spending? I think you're alluding to that in this granularity, but have you had clients who have been able to show, like, what would happen if we don't just delay for 3 weeks, but if we cut that spending, how much it's gonna hurt the company?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that is a common sort of question that comes up. You can imagine in the back half of many organizations. back half of the year. So that question definitely comes up, and this is where having prepared properly can help, because if we've got the data, we've got the analysis, we know what marketing's role is, what's the business impact of it, and we can then accurately simulate and showcase what will happen. And as I mentioned before, doing that over time allows the organization and the finance partner in this particular situation to see that there is a high degree of accuracy with these things, which drives the confidence and the trust. But being able to go back to the team and say, hey, yeah, no problem to cut the budgets, or increase the budgets, right? Sometimes it's the other way around. Usually it's not, but to be able to say, okay, no problem. In real world, this is a real world situation and example, that's common, okay, we're going to lose 200,000 widgets of sale, this quarter now, and another X thousand into next quarter. And then what happens is, in this particular case, it allowed the marketer to keep basically half of the budget cut that they were talking about. So instead of cutting the whole budget, they cut half, kind of split the difference. Ended up, in this particular case, they were aligned on the goal. So as long as they're aligned on the goal, it's not like more marketing is always better. Marketing should be used as a means to achieve goals. And that's where we want to basically make sure we drive the conversation.
Yeah, I think to maybe share a specific case study that we'll be publishing later this year. So, beginning of the year, one of our clients, is facing this classic challenge, right? Luxury retailer, cost of goods sold going up, going up noticeably. So there was a question from the CEO, can we cut marketing to make up some of this gap? And so, yeah, did a series of scenarios and showed, to Mike's point, not just what happens in sales, but also what happens with price premiums and what happens with long-term brand awareness. And it was kind of the combination of those three, to Mike's point, like, can we agree on the KPI? Like, yeah, sales is important, but also, like, for a luxury retailer, price premium is important. Um, and also as a luxury retailer, very concerned about certain brand awareness consideration, price premium type metrics. And all three of those were going to go down with marketing. And that actually led to them slightly increasing the marketing budget. We did three different cuts and one small increase. And that one actually led to an increase because of all the forecasted effects across metrics. And they ended up, dealing with those costs through other parts of the business.
Oh, that's great. That's very encouraging, actually. So, this has been great. This has been such a informative conversation. Thank you. So, to wrap up, if you could give CMOs one actionable play to run tomorrow to align their departmental goals with the C-suite's focus on growth and profitability, what would it be?
Sure. I would I always struggle with this one because what our research is consistently showing us is it depends on where you are. So one of the things we would say, and I can share links to this research if you want, is assess your current relationship with finance. Because what your next step is going to be is going to depend on what the strength of that relationship is. But to give you one proactive idea that I almost never hear, I would suggest, reaching out to that finance leader and asking them to co-judge in like an undergraduate or local college analytics competition to get out of the familiar space, be exposed to the energy of youth, and have them, present to you like their analytic solutions to a problem, and then see what conversations that spurs with that finance partner afterwards. I'm pretty sure it'll be quite positive.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting idea. Where my mind went with that question was kind of back to one of the things we were just talking about, which I think is, um, I don't want to say under leveraged, but maybe not top of mind in many cases, and that is just simply to seek to align on the goals. What is the goal that we need to achieve with this budget or set of budgets, or quarterly strategy or what have you, right? That should be the focus area. And a lot of times we get caught up in, like, what's the ROI? Is it high? Is it low? Should I spend? Should I not? What's the goal? Do we want to maintain our business? Do we want to grow it? Do we want to grow it by 5%, by 10%, by 20%? What are those specific things that we want to anchor to? And that is when we can allow good conversations to happen around how we're going to be able to achieve them. That will also open up the conversation around, sources and methods to be able to get after those sorts of things. But so it really starts with goal setting. We even talk to our customers about this when we're working with brands is, ROI, trying to drive ROI isn't really a goal. Trying to drive business growth with the same spend or with less spend or with more spend is a goal. Business growth is the goal. And that's the thing that I think we want to probably try and anchor to. And it might be sales, it might be new customer acquisitions, as Jason mentioned, might be brand health. But making sure we're aligning on those goals is really going to be important to have a fruitful conversation with finance and marketing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks both of you for joining me today, and thank you for all your help on our two reports, the Multiplier Effect and the Multiplier Playbook. I really appreciate being partners with you. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate it as well. Thank you. Yeah, no, we're excited and proud to be a part of this work. I think it's very important for organizations, so appreciate you including us.
Yeah, thank you, Anne Marie. It was our pleasure.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mike. So you can find more of Analytic Partners' insights in the new Multiplier Playbook on WARC.com. Be sure to subscribe to the WARC Podcast so you don't miss any episodes, including our upcoming episode next month, where I'll be joined by our partners from Profit to discuss how to restructure your marketing department and tear down internal silos that hold brand back. Thanks for listening.